On Friday, November 7, 1997, 13-year-old Stevie Bellas rushed home to share with her mother what had happened at school that day. When Stevie entered the house, she was immediately surprised to see her younger siblings sitting in the hallway, crying. She called out for her mother, but there was no response. Stevie headed towards the laundry room, but stopped halfway as she reached the kitchen. In the kitchen, she was met with a horrifying scene. Things were scattered everywhere. Clothes were strewn about, and there was a long trail of dried blood on the floor. Her mother lay motionless on the floor, surrounded by a pool of drying blood. Stevie leaned down to touch her mother's face, longing to lift her and embrace her, but she understood that she couldn't do that. The girl called 911 for Sarasota, Florida's emergency services. What the police officers noticed when they arrived at the home of Sheila and Jamie Bellas were the 4 children, approximately 2 years old, all covered in blood. However, the children themselves were not injured. The blood on them belonged to their mother. In the kitchen, near the victim's body, stood a 13-year-old girl who had called the police. She had returned from school and discovered the horrifying scene. The victim was Sheila Bellush, the mother of the 6 children, including 2 teenage girls, Stevie and Daryl, and 4 twins born in her marriage to her second husband, Jamie Bellas. The family had recently moved from Texas. Jamie was a successful representative of a pharmaceutical company, and Sheila worked as a secretary in a law firm. The police did not find any signs of robbery, but it was evident that a struggle had occurred. The attack on the woman began in the laundry room and then moved to the kitchen. In the garage of the house, forensic experts found a towel with gunpowder residue and a bullet hole, indicating that the killer had attempted to create an improvised suppressor. A spent shell casing was found on the dryer, and a bullet hole remained in the pantry wall. Of course, all rooms were checked for fingerprints, and a fingerprint was found on the dryer that did not belong to any family member. On the kitchen floor, there was also a blood-soaked knife with a bent blade tip, matching other kitchen knives belonging to the family, which were hanging on a magnetic holder on the wall. It appeared that the killer had intended to shoot his victim, but the gun malfunctioned after the first shot due to the towel, forcing him to switch to the knife, which he found at the scene, and 2 slashed her throat. What was most horrifying was that the killer clearly panicked when the gun failed to work, and the wounded but still alive Sheila tried to reach the phone. She had managed to put her hand on the phone, but judging by the smeared bloodstain trailing downward, the killer caught up with her with a knife. The victim's husband, Jamie Bellas, appeared on the scene after learning of what had happened and was naturally shocked and distraught by the sudden loss. When he managed to compose himself, the police officers wanted to speak with him, to which he inquired whether he needed a lawyer. This was an unexpected statement coming from an innocent person. Why would he need a lawyer? Was he hiding something? With heightened suspicion, the investigators took Jamie to the police station for questioning, searching for any possible motive or inconsistency in his words. Jamie, a former Marine, was a large and serious-looking man. His concern for the younger twins and the older girls appeared to be entirely sincere. He explained that Stevie and Daryl were the result of Sheila's previous marriage to Alan Blackthorne. According to Jamie, Alan was a very wealthy man, but also a terrible tyrant. He enjoyed manipulating people and had been abusive to his wife during their marriage. After their divorce, Sheila received a 20% share of his company plus $170,000 for emotional distress, totaling over $1 million. Alan was not willing to pay such a sum to his ex-wife and the girls, so he declared bankruptcy. Jamie Bellas claimed that he had an alibi for the time of his wife's murder. He was working in Fort Myers. While the detectives checked Jamie's alibi, they decided to speak with Sheila's ex-husband and millionaire, Alan Blackthorne, over the phone. He had already heard about the incident from the news and showed no grief over his ex-wife's murder. However, he had a solid alibi. He was playing golf at the time of the murder. Dozens of people could confirm that they saw him on the golf course that day. The news of the brutal murder of the mother of 6 children had caught the attention of not only Alan, but also other residents of Sarasota. They called the police, wanting to assist in the investigation. While such reports are rarely relevant to a case, this time, a gas station attendant contacted the police, sharing that on the day of the murder, a young man had visited the station asking for directions to Mark Ridge Road, which was exactly where the murder occurred. The attendant described the man as a young Hispanic or Italian in khaki-colored clothing. She showed him a map of Sarasota, explaining how to get to the street he was looking for. When the police obtained this map, it turned out to be laminated, making it perfect for lifting fingerprints. This turned out to be a fortunate break in the investigation. The fingerprints on the map matched the fingerprint taken from the dryer in the victim's home. Luck continued to favor the investigators after that. A neighbor of the Bellas family named Jacob Mast, who was mowing his lawn that day, contacted them. He had seen a young man arrive in a sports car wearing camouflage clothing and immediately realized that the man didn't belong to the neighborhood. Jacob went back to work, but not before coming up with a rhyme that would help him remember the stranger's license plate number. The police checked the license plate number in the state of Florida, but found nothing. However, since Sheila was originally from Texas and her ex-husband remained there, they decided to check the license plate in Texas. Bingo! The car was registered to Maria del Toro of La Prior, Texas. The detectives immediately flew to Texas, where they were greeted by an elderly woman. She confirmed that it was her car, but explained that it was constantly in the possession of her grandson, 21-year-old Joey del Toro. Joey seemed to be the least likely suspect to be a hardened criminal capable of such a crime. He was a star of the school football team, a regular partygoer, and a fun-loving guy who was well-liked by everyone. However, the evidence was hard to ignore. The fingerprint match on the dryer left little room for doubt. Detectives headed to Joey's address in Austin, where he lived with his girlfriend, but he wasn't there. His girlfriend informed them that he had hurriedly left a few days earlier, leaving behind his car and a sports bag. Inside the bag, detectives found khaki-colored clothing similar to what witnesses had seen on the suspect. Joey's car turned out to be a treasure trove of evidence. Among other things, they discovered a gun matching the one used to shoot Sheila and a map of Florida. All of this directly or indirectly connected Joey del Toro to the crime scene. But why would a young man travel thousands of kilometers just to murder a mother of 6 children and then return? What was the connection between them? Did he know her from the period when she lived in Texas? Investigators decided to talk to Joey's friends to understand where he might be hiding. Almost without exception, they mentioned his cousin, Sam Gonzalez. The police brought Sam in for questioning, initially wanting to find out Joey's whereabouts. However, it became evident from the very beginning of the interrogation that Sam was extremely nervous, not just because he knew where his cousin was. Step by step, they managed to coax out of him that he was directly involved in the crime. It turned out that he was supposed to attack Sheila, but upon learning that a woman was to be the victim, he refused. However, his cousin Joey wasn't as principled, so in the summer of 1997, Sam introduced him to his friend Danny. Danny initially wanted Sheila to be severely beaten, but gradually that became insufficient, and he demanded that she be killed. Danny promised Joey several $1,000s for injuring Sheila, and up to $10,000 for killing her. Since the accomplices were in desperate need of money, they believed they could carry out the plan without getting caught. Detectives realized that they were dealing with a contracted murder, but they needed to find out who this Danny was and why he wanted to pay for the assault or murder of Sheila. They needed to extract every piece of information Sam knew. First and foremost, they needed to find Joey. Sam explained that on Monday morning, one of his friends had called Joey and informed him that Florida police were looking for him. So Joey hastily got on a bus from San Antonio to Laredo and crossed the Mexican border. Detectives admitted that this was an excruciating situation. They knew who was behind Sheila's murder, but the suspect was not in jail and was not even in the same country. While the police continued to track Joey down in Mexico, the prosecutors began building a case against the conspirators. Joey was brought into the case, implicating Sam and Danny. This part was clear, but Sam didn't know who had paid Danny. The question remained, who was the puppeteer pulling the strings? Who was the mastermind behind Danny? A review of Danny's bank accounts revealed that he was a member of Oak Hills Country Club, a golf club that another person known to the detectives also belonged to. It turned out that Danny was a regular golfing partner of Alan Blackthorne. In other words, the suspect played golf with Sheila's ex-husband. Danny spent days on the golf course, but he wasn't there for the love of the game. He was there for the money. They placed substantial bets on their games, and over the course of a year, Danny had received $300,000 in cash from Alan due to golf bets. At first glance, it seemed that Danny was using his millionaire friend, but in reality, according to the investigators, it was the other way around. Alan realized that in Danny he had found someone who could be the instrument of his vendetta against Sheila. He despised her for being awarded full custody of the girls and the substantial sum she was entitled to after the divorce. Financial records of Alan's company revealed numerous medical patents worth millions of dollars. After the divorce, Sheila was set to receive over $1 million from Alan. This was a significant motive. He didn't want to pay her a cent, and he knew he could manipulate Danny to harm Sheila. Alan cleverly probed the ground, bringing up the idea of building a golf course and offering Danny a share in the project. He made it seem like he would hand over a portion of the project to Danny. He knew that Danny would fall for it. Convincing Danny, a master manipulator himself, was no trouble. Now the problem for the prosecutors was to find evidence to support their theory. Alan had distanced himself from the actual execution of the crime quite effectively. So investigators decided to put pressure on Danny to get him to reveal his boss. But that didn't work out as planned. Danny immediately demanded a lawyer. At that moment, there was no grounds to arrest him. Even Sam was not under arrest yet. So investigators decided to try their luck by visiting Alan's mansion. They were greeted by his fourth wife, Maureen, who invited them inside. She knew who they were. Maureen picked up the phone and called Alan, saying they had guests, as if it were some sort of code. Their suspicion was confirmed within minutes when the phone rang. It was Alan's lawyer, and the first thing he asked was whether there were any warrants out for his client. Since there were no warrants, the lawyer stated that Alan Blackthorne would not speak to them in his absence. The detectives left empty-handed. It seemed like everything was against the investigation at that point. Joey was in hiding. Danny and Sam had little that could be directly pinned on them. And Alan had shielded himself with top-notch lawyers, ones that money could buy. There were no direct pieces of evidence linking him to the crime. They needed Danny's testimony, so they decided to arrest Danny and Sam. Prosecutors were hoping for Sammy and Danny's testimonies to turn against Alan. Sammy agreed to a deal in exchange for his testimony against Joey and Danny, and they promised to reduce his prison sentence. Of course, Sammy wasn't a big fish, but he could help get closer to the main suspect. However, Danny declined the same deal that Sammy accepted, which was 20 years with 15 to be served. He was confident that he wouldn't be convicted and staked his life on it. In court, Danny attempted to shift all the blame onto Joey, claiming that he had only intended to beat the woman, while Joey was the one who killed her. Proving Danny's guilt was indeed challenging. Since the prosecutors believed that Alan's motive was to avoid paying substantial alimony, they needed to demonstrate that Danny had provided a more cost-effective solution, a murder for hire. $10,000 compared to $1 million. Sammy explained that it was Danny who convinced Joey that the easiest way to get the money was to shoot Sheila. Danny lost the case, was found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. He was furious, realizing that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, while Alan continued to live the life of a millionaire, spending all his time on the golf course. Danny understood that he had been used and promised to testify against Alan. On November 18th, it was announced that Joey Del Toro had been arrested in Mexico. When the local authorities learned that Joey hadn't obtained a visa, they detained him. All that remained was to extradite him to the United States. Detectives didn't yet know that bureaucratic delays would take almost a year to resolve. Nonetheless, at least he was in custody, and the police knew his whereabouts. The Texas District Attorney was willing to take the risk and prosecute Alan Blackthorne. However, he was protected by a law stating that a person cannot be found guilty based on uncorroborated testimony from a co-conspirator. Moreover, a recent federal law had been passed, one of its provisions specifically stating that a spouse or former spouse cannot cross state lines to harm their ex-spouse. It seemed as though this law had been created specifically for this case. When Joey went to Florida to kill Sheila, he had his phone with him. Phone records confirmed that he had crossed state lines. This provided the police with the opportunity to arrest Alan on the grounds that he had hired someone who crossed state lines to commit a contract killing. From the very first day of the trial, the prosecutors aimed to build their case and sway the jury. Therefore, they allowed them to hear the heart-wrenching 911 call from Stevie when she returned home from school and found her mother murdered. The prosecutors presented the jury with crime scene photos, numerous pictures of the deceased woman, the murder weapons, a blood trail stretching across the entire kitchen, and finally the children's footprints in blood covering the house. Some members of the jury physically reacted to this evidence. The children, all under 2 years old, had become witnesses to Shelia's murder. They spent over 6 hours with their mother, lying lifeless in a pool of blood, feeling cold, hungry, and terrified. Next, the prosecutors called Stevie as a witness. By the time of Alan's trial, she had turned 16. She held up well, shedding tears only twice. It's understandable given the gruesome scene she had to describe, finding her mother with her throat slashed and her 3 brothers and sister in a pool of blood. Stevie had long stopped calling Alan Dad, which didn't bode well for him. As Stevie testified, there was not a trace of emotion, sympathy, remorse, or empathy on Alan's face. They then summoned Danny. He was angry with nothing to lose, and he spilled all the details about his involvement in the conspiracy. He claimed that initially Alan had wanted to beat his ex-wife, but later that didn't suffice. The millionaire promised the accomplices $50,000 if he obtained full custody. Unexpectedly, the defendant decided to give his own testimony. He was convinced he could persuade the jurors of his innocence. His lawyer helped create the impression that everything he had ever done in life was for the children, for Stevie and Daryl. Then, it was the prosecutor's turn, and he didn't miss the chance to turn Alan's words against him. He asked Alan how often he had communicated with the girls over the past 4 years, how many times he had wished them well on holidays, or sent a card. Alan, who loses $20,000 every day he spends on the golf course, hadn't given his children a single cent after their mother's murder. He couldn't deny it. Moreover, he chose to explain his feelings towards his ex-wife in a rather strange way. Supposedly, he didn't hate Sheila, just the things she did. After 3 such responses, the jurors were convinced he loathed her. Alan had effectively portrayed himself in a negative light. Finally, the jurors retreated for deliberations. Hours passed without a verdict when the detectives received a call. The Mexican authorities were ready to send Joey Del Toro back to Miami Airport and hand him over to the police. Joey had confessed to everything. He knew Alan was the one who ordered the murder. He had been told that Sheila was a terrible mother, and Alan had decided to kill her for the girls. On November 7th, 1997, Joey approached the house, found an open window, entered, and observed Sheila for a whole hour. But all he saw was a loving mother. The young man claimed he had intended to leave, but when Sheila noticed the open window and their eyes met, he had no choice. Whether this was true or not, it didn't really matter because the outcome was the same. Sheila had died, and Joey received a life sentence for just a few $1,000s, a relatively small sum to ruin the rest of his life. After 33.5 hours of deliberation, the jurors found Alan Blackthorne guilty. What an irony. The thing Alan Blackthorne loved most in life, money and control, would now be taken away from him. Jamie Bellush and her 4 twins moved back to his hometown in New Jersey. The girls were raised by Sheila's family, her sisters,